De Verenigde Naties Working Group die heeft een onderzoek verricht naar de de woonsituatie en tal van andere zaken voor wat betreft de Afrikaanse diaspora in Suriname. Met andere woorden, de Afro-Surinamers in Suriname. En het onderzoek richtte zich op verschillende gebieden en de bevindingen en de aanbevelingen die zijn er dan op deze donderdag, op deze woensdag dan ook gepresenteerd op een persconferentie in Royal Torarica. TBN PRIMEALERT, die was er ook aanwezig en wij voeren u naar het volgende verslag.
Let me say up front that we are very, very appreciative of the government of Suriname for, in the first instance, inviting us to your beautiful country. We've enjoyed seeing, I think, 3 of the 7 rivers in Suriname, especially on our way where there's one that's particularly big and very enticing. We are grateful for the hospitality that we've had from our host ministry, the Ministry of Justice and Police. And we are grateful of the time that all members of government at both the national and local levels that they have spent with us. We've had discussions, we've been able to listen to issues and concerns, we've been able to ask questions, and we've also been able to respond to questions. And this morning we had an opportunity to debrief the government so that they know what our major findings and recommendations are. And as usual, at the end of a visit like this one, we take the opportunity to brief the media, because you're the persons who will transmit directly to the public what the visit has been able to accomplish. So thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to answering your questions. Please allow me to just share very briefly with you 3 things. 1, what our overall approach is to these fact-finding visits. 2, what are our main findings, and this is not an exhaustive list. And then just the top-line recommendations that we're making to the government of Suriname. Our approach, our methodology is to do a lot of desk reviews before we come to the country. And so we have read virtually every report from human rights bodies on Suriname. We've also looked at data. Some of them are old, like the mixed data, and we also reviewed the inputs that we received from a public call on the visit. That is our standard methodology. While in the country, we have met with many, many ministries. We've also paid a visit to a school, a tribal village, a village in the not far into the hinterland, but into the hinterland. We have visited a youth detention center. We've visited the Santa Boma Central Penitentiary. We haven't been able to visit a clinic or a hospital, but we've been able to visit many neighborhoods, both on the coast and further in, where people of African descent are concentrated. So that has given us a sense of not just the geography, but who is where and what their concerns are. And in the course of these conversations, we've asked questions on the civil and political, economic, social, and cultural rights of Surinamese of African descent. We've also engaged with civil society, representatives of the Maroon community, of the plantation community, among academics in Paramaribo, among the Creole population, and we have put together all of this information. That's what we usually do in country. At the end of our visit, I think we stayed up all night, some of us, over the last 3 nights, to put together an end of mission statement, as well as a press briefing. But since we come from different parts of the world, we also worked together for a consensus view of what is going to be in the final report. Once we leave here, that report will be reviewed, fact-checked, edited, and the government of Suriname will receive a copy of that report first and have an opportunity to respond, and we'll correct any factual errors that the government puts forward before the working group reports to the Human Rights Council in October and to the third committee of the UN General Assembly in November. So that's our approach. Let me take this opportunity to share with you a little bit about how we actually go about the work, and the opportunity to introduce my colleagues, Ms. Miriam Ekiudoko, who is the member from the Eastern European states, and she has focal point responsibilities for Europe, and she is of Ethiopian descent. And so her portfolio during this visit was to look specifically at social and cultural issues. My colleague, Ms. Isabel Mamadou, is of Congolese descent, but a Spanish citizen, and her portfolio while we've been here has been to look at civil and political rights. My name is Barbara Reynolds. I come from the Latin American and Caribbean states. I'm actually from Guyana, and my remit during this week was to look at legal, legislative, constitutional justice issues and economic empowerment. And so that is how her work have divvied up. We have members of our secretariat who are here to provide technical guidance and support to us, Dr. Marie-Joseph Aïssi and Mr. Amok at the back, and so we're a group of 5. This is day 10, and we've completed our visit. So what did we find? We found many specific things in those 3 baskets of rights, but the 4 main things that we found are: 1, there is a near absence of data on all of those rights issues. They got disaggregated by race in Suriname. And that's a big concern, because where the data are not disaggregated by race, it's virtually impossible to understand better what is the situation of people of African descent. So we've relied on observations, on testimonies, and data that are quite old, looking back to the 2012 census, and some from various reports. The second thing that we noted here is that there is an anxiety, a tension that is fairly widespread in the country around land rights, land use, land tenure, land ownership. The third major finding that cuts across all of those rights is the labeling and stereotyping of people of African descent on the one hand, and on the other hand, this internalization of these projected labels and stereotypes. And then finally, one of the things that we've heard from virtually everyone is that people of African descent are falling behind other groups on virtually every dimension to do with human rights. And this is due in part because of legacy issues, but also contemporary issues around education and access to healthcare and access to credit, access to insurance, housing. And that means that the development of these groups is somewhat retarded and falls behind their peers. So those are the mere findings. Based on these, and please remember that these are really, really top line, we've made some recommendations to the government, one of which is to use the declaration of a second decade for people of African descent by the UN General Assembly as a vehicle in Suriname to galvanize and intensify and accelerate action towards the achievement of the human rights of people of African descent. We've also recommended that the government look at issues of infrastructure, look at issues of education, the curriculum, how the history of people of African descent is documented, how children are taught the language of instruction, and very, very importantly, to invest in access to basic services where people of African descent are concentrated in the interior, in the hinterland, in tribal villages, but also around the peri-urban areas. Our key findings and some of our recommendations, at the end of the report, we'll probably end up with like 22, 23, 24 recommendations. So the ones we've just shared with you are really, really just the top line recommendations.
Ja, een dergelijk onderzoek is het de eerste keer dat het is gedaan in Suriname. Zo ja. Wat hebben zij dan als vergelijkingsmateriaal gebruikt?
Thank you for your question. It is the first country visit to Suriname. What do we use as a basis of comparison? We don't really compare countries with countries. What we take as the point of departure are the international commitments that Suriname has made. So Suriname has ratified or signed or acceded to several international conventions, like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So that's what Suriname has said to the international community. These are our commitments. So we're signing or ratifying these conventions, and there are many of them. Those are just like the top ones. So that becomes our basis and our rationale. And we look at those, and then we come and we say, okay, if you have said that you are committed to this, let us see how Suriname is doing in each of these 5 broad areas: civil rights, political rights, economic rights, social rights, and cultural rights. We can't compare Suriname with any other country because Suriname is unique. It has its own constitution, its own laws, its own cultures, its own ethos, and yes, it has fabulous food and beautiful rivers, but we can't really compare Suriname with French Guyana. It has a French, legacy in juridical terms. Guyana is British common law. So there's, yes, people are people everywhere, but we really are evidence-based and evidence-informed. And so we look at Suriname as Suriname with its commitments, and then we say, having made these commitments, this is what we see with objective eyes. And we ask the government, and you know what we found out actually? Both from government and from civil society, all of what we say, we've heard from you. And so we're actually reflecting back to you what you've told us and what we've read. And that's how we usually work.
De informatie die men heeft verschaft, op basis van hoeveel respondenten, hoeveel mensen heeft men geïnterviewd?
Thank you. We haven't had a number count, but we met with several ministries, local governments in Onverwacht, not Brunswick, it was Idel-Fitr, Totnes, Albina, Mungo, school, prison, civil society organization. I would say we've probably engaged with about 150 people all told, across all of those platforms. One minister, the Honorable Minister of Justice and Police, senior official from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ambassador, the permanent secretary. So it's been a range of persons. The chair of the Human Rights Committee of the National Assembly, the only physician with whom we've met during this trip, so it was good to meet him. So it's been a range of people, a range of situations, a range of geographic areas, a range of sectors.
Zijn er uitdagingen geweest om tot deze bevindingen te komen?
Yes, we did. And we've cited them. And the main challenge that we have is the lack of data disaggregated by race. And we've cited that, and the government is aware that that is a challenge. So It's not, anything that they don't know. And, again, just as that has been a challenge, it's a recommendation that we've made explicitly that the government take measures to ensure that data are disaggregated by race.